QSO Today, episode 202, Raul Midon, AE3RM. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America. Grab your ICOM gear and head out to the field day next weekend. And by QRP Labs, home of the QCX Arduino-based transceiver kit for under $50 US. Please support the QSO Today podcast by supporting these fine sponsors. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guthforz-Z1UG, your host. Badass and blind is how my guest on QSO Today describes himself on his website and the release of his new jazz album by the same name. Raul Midon, AE3RM, is also a long-time and dedicated amateur radio operator who takes his ham radio operation on his musical tours around the world. For those of us who think we are too busy to get on the air, Raul provides an answer to a busy schedule. AE3RM, this is Eric Forz-Z1UG. Are you there, Raul?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for having me. This is AE3RM.
Raul, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. My thanks to Jim Miller, WB2REM, my guest in episode 196 of the QSO Today podcast, for introducing us. Raul, can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
I guess, like a lot of people, it started, I was always fascinated by radio. I'd almost have to say that it started with, I got a gift of a transoceanic Zenith shortwave radio when I was 5 years old. And it was a, 9-band, I think it took 9 D batteries. And it was a, shortwave receiver, no single sideband, just AM. It even had long wave on it, actually. And just would listen to shortwave and, the fascination of that. And then, of course, CB radio was all the rage back in the 70s. And then we had a teacher in Alamogordo. My brother and I had a teacher in Alamogordo, New Mexico, the blind school where I went to school, that was learning ham radio and decided she was going to teach a class. And of course, we were the only ones in the class. So it sort of ended up being a kind of one-on-one thing. And we, she sort of became in charge of helping us study. And back in those days, you had to go to the FCC to take the test. So it was a 4-hour drive each way to go take the test. So it was pretty high stakes, for us. I was 12 years old when I took the test. And
that was your general class?
That was, what happened was I passed the tech. I got the tech. We then, 30 days later, we took the general. We went again and took the general and passed. So basically at 12, I got my general. But the first time I took the test, I only passed the tech. And literally the way we did it was we copied the code right there and we answered the questions verbally. So it was I then would write code, CW down when I did it in Braille, but actually it's almost easier to just copy it verbally. And I became very good at CW. I was at this wall at 9 words a minute and eventually just kind of, once I got over that wall, it came pretty quickly. Well, who else was who I loved, who was a ham, who actually I learned CW from. I should have said that on the thing. I actually learned CW from Gene Shepard.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now he was on the East Coast though. I mean, was he?
No, he had. I had a cassette. He put out a series of CW things. K2ORS was his call.
Really?
And and I learned CW from a cassette that he put out.
Well, that's amazing. Gene Shepard's been mentioned a number of times by guests on the show, and I knew about his radio show, but I never knew that he was actually, he had actually made, learning materials for ham radio. But, he was also, I guess, ham radio through and through as well.
Absolutely. And he was a ham as a kid and stayed in it. And I don't know if he ever had a real big station. I don't think so. But he was a ham since he was a kid. And I had his CW cassette when I was learning for the studying for the tech, for the novice tech, whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But it wouldn't have been when you were learning. Well, let me see. If you were 12 years old, you were 63, right? So it would have been 75, right? In the mid-70s when you got your first license. So there would have been cassettes in those days.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no, for sure. That all the material that I had at first was on cassette for CW. And it was K2ORS, and, he talked about, hey, it's Gene Shepard, and we're going to learn Morse code. Yeah. So, and I didn't even know about him when I did that until after. Then I knew about his radio show and had listened to it. Obviously I wouldn't have been listening to it as a kid.
Well, you might not have heard him unless he was syndicated.
Right. I couldn't get WOR from New Mexico.
But there was a lot of hams on the East Coast that were inspired by him as kids and became hams as a result of his talking about ham radio on the air.
I absolutely wouldn't doubt it. I mean, he could tell a story, and it was amazing. And as I said, when I learned from him, I didn't even know who he was. And recently, I learned about the movie that he did. My wife and I watched it. He did this Christmas story. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, but I'll look it up.
It's called, it's about a gun, actually, which is at first seems like a turnoff, but it's great. It's about his desire to get this gun, this BB gun. And, you'll shoot your eye out.
No, but that's an American story, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Right.
But
he
narrates it.
Yeah.
And it's a character. It's not him, but he narrates it.
Right.
And it's great.
Okay, so you're age 12 when you got your first license. Do you remember what your first call sign was?
N5ACR was my call. We had, and it was all club radios. We didn't have a rig of our own. So we had a kind of a club station at the school. And I think it may have been an HW8 might have been the first.
So that was a QRP radio.
QRP, Heathkit, QRP, CW only rig, I believe.
Yeah. And
the
school was in Albuquerque, right?
Alamogordo.
Oh, Alamogordo. So you really were far away. And when you say
were far.
When you drove 4 hours, did you go to Denver to take your test? Do you remember?
I believe it was Albuquerque.
Oh, Albuquerque. I didn't realize. Yeah, I guess that's Alamogordo. I guess could be 4 hours away.
Yeah, I believe it was. We didn't go all the way to Denver. That's for sure. There was a test facility in Albuquerque, so we went there. But the license, the interim call was Denver, so we were interim DV there for a little while.
Oh, that's cool.
I remember.
Now, when you keep referring to the we, you're talking about you have an identical twin, Marco.
Right.
And he is still a ham?
He's a ham as well. Yeah.
How about that?
But it was HW8. Then the club had, I think, HW16. I think there was a DX40. The first rig that I actually owned was a 1-channel Motorola 2-meter rig that was on the repeater, the repeater that was at the time, and it was I think it was called the Motorola Brick.
Well, that would have been at age 12, I mean, around that time, that would have been the mid-'70s, right?
Absolutely.
So that was probably the Motorola HT220.
Say that again?
The Motorola HT220 was a brick. The Motorola HT200 had a metal back. So if you remember...
Yeah, I think that was it. I think that's what it was. There was no frequency variability whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a HT200, and it was big. It was a brick.
Yeah.
You'd hurt somebody with it.
Absolutely. And, they used to say in the old days, if it has a handle on it, it's portable.
Yeah, that's true. Even if it weighed 40 pounds.
Exactly. So that was the first. And then I think at some point, I got a Wilson 1402 from somebody, which was a 6-channel handy-talkie. And that was like, wow, that was amazing to have, 6 channels,
Do you remember any mentors beyond Mrs. Robinson?
Mrs. Redmond.
Oh, Mrs. Redmond, I'm sorry. Do you remember any?
Mrs. Redmond, her call was WD58AR, and she, drove us back and forth, and was in charge of all that. She was a biology teacher originally, but she got interested in ham radio, and we were interested. So that's, Yes, there was another guy actually, and I was just thinking about it just before I was going to look him up. He would be really old now. His call was N5BO. It was a vanity call. I forget what it's called before. His name was Ambrose Berry, and I don't know if he's still around. I haven't, he would be really old now. And it was we went to his house to sort of see what it was all about. And he had a station, and he lived in Alamogordo. And his call was N5BO. And I meant to look it up and see what was, but that was a long time ago.
Did you remember, when thinking back a long time ago, do you remember your first contact on the air?
It was like somebody in Nebraska, and I don't have, some people keep a really good log. I mean, I have no. I remember talking in one of my first contacts to K7UGA, which I found out later was Barry Goldwater, which was pretty wild. That was one of my first contacts. It wasn't the first one, but it was. I did talk to Barry.
Then that probably was on single sideband.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it was probably as a third party operator. Maybe not. No, maybe not, because we got the General very, very soon after. So
now that you're a young ham, were you inspired by electronics and ham radio to, kind of put that on your agenda for a professional career or education?
Not really, in the sense that I'm a musician. Ham radio has always been part of my life. It figured into where I live now, because I lived in when I left the blind school, I went to high school for 2 years, to a regular school, which was really, really hard, a prep school actually, and we had ham radio there. There was an antenna that we put up that was a unipole that was up on the hill behind our house. And I think that antenna might have worked for 3 or 4 days, and it took so much effort. We lugged stuff up this mountain, and I mean, it was a mountain, and it was all open wire, and it was not that, but boy, did it work. It was on 40 meters, and when you plug that in, there was stuff that when you had the dipole, you couldn't even hear it, whereas on this antenna, it was a 5.9. So it was a spectacular antenna, but it wasn't destined to work for very long. Then I went to the University of Miami, and we had a little ham club there. There was a few people in the club. We had a repeater that we sort of tried to maintain. It had a 220 link. It didn't have a duplexer. It had separate receiver and transmitter linked by 220. But I got really heavy into music, and so it didn't really figure into my career per se. I wasn't educated in electronics either, which is, other than ham radio and just being interested in, didn't become an engineer or anything like that. So for me, it was always kind of more about talking to people and just the magic of, propagation. It's always been fascinating to me. And then everywhere that I've been, I've always had some kind of a ham station. When I moved to Manhattan, it was challenging, but I had an Outbacker there at the apartment.
And what is an Outbacker?
It's a vertical antenna with little taps that you you literally, it has a tap and a little jumper that you plug in to each tap, a piece of wire that plugs into the tap that, obviously causes the antenna to resonate depending on which band you want. And you just do it by hand. You just go out there and, okay, this is a 20 meter tap. This is a 17 meter tap. And I was on the 24th floor of a 33-story building in Midtown Manhattan, and had a terrace. And tell you what, it wasn't bad, for being a vertical. And it has a little whip, they call it a stinger or something, that you can kind of adjust for the SWR depending on what part of the band you wanted to resonate on. So I had that when I lived in Manhattan. And I also had what do you call this antenna? Isotron for 80 meters. And it never got much below 1.9 to 1 SWR, but it was at least an S unit or more above the outbacker on 80 meters. And it radiated through the coax and everything. I mean, it wasn't an antenna that you'd want to run power on, but it worked. It worked pretty well. I much better than I thought. And, it was one of the only solutions I could think of for 80 meters in that situation.
What's your favorite operating mode?
I think probably SSB, although I do love CW, and I have a Kier, and I use sometimes in contests I use the memory in the radio so I can call CQ and 59 or 599 and that kind of thing. So I do CW a fair amount as well. I still enjoy CW a lot, but I'd say probably most of the time I spend on single sideband. Every now and then I go to AM. In the early days, I had a converted CB rig, just basically swap the crystals out and you're on 10 meters, and did quite a bit of AM with that. So, and the radio I have, it's decent on AM. It's not a super hi-fi rig, but it works.
Now, you mentioned contests. Do you have a favorite contest, and are you a regular contest operator?
I'm not. I've never been really serious about contests, but I do sometimes on CQ Worldwide. I'll get on there and give some points out, but I'm not. I've never been really serious about trying to win anything or anything like that. I've participated in it, but just kind of casually.
And what's the current rig?
Currently, I have a TS2000. The antenna is a 4-element multi-band Yagi. It's a Mosley with the kit for 40 meters. It's on a crank-up tower, U.S. tower. It's up at about 65 feet. And I have an Ameritron ALS 1306 amplifier, solid state. I have a tuner in the line for just kind of making it so with the solid state amplifier, the SWR has to be really low or it turns off. So I use a tuner. I also do a lot of remote operation.
Really?
Because I travel so much. So I have a TS480 that I use for that, and I have the remote rig boxes. And I got some help setting it up. It's not a plug and play type of thing, but I have it set up so that I have the TS480 just stays hooked up to the remote rig box. And when I travel, I have I just hook up the remote rig box to the internet, and the box has a little jack for the microphone, and I'm off to the races. I have a web switch, which allows me to control the amplifier and the rotator remotely
over the internet. Yeah, pretty cool. I just out of curiosity, do you use Skype with that remote rig in order to carry the audio, or is that carried, with the software?
It carries with the software, and it's with a good internet connection. It's transparent. You can't even tell that you're remote. And the reason that I like remote rig, and a lot of people like using the PC because there's less stuff to carry around. I'm still carrying around a little box, which is not that big, with a little wall wart and the front panel of the TS480, which is what I like about it. So I don't have the added layer of trying to access the radio with a screen reader as a blind operator. With remote rig and the front panel, you hook up the front panel and it's as if you hit the power button and you're operating the radio. You're turning the dial, you're turning the knobs, you're doing everything that you would if you were in front of the radio, except it's over the internet. And that's what I like about it. The phone, I turn on and off the amplifier with either the phone or the computer, and all the buttons on the rotator part of it are also accessible. So you can either hit north, south, northwest, southwest, east, southeast, all that, or you can hit the clockwise and counterclockwise buttons if you want to, go in smaller increments. And all of that is accessible. You just hit the buttons and then it also has a live active, so you can tell, you can hear that it's turning.
And now this message from ICOM America. Now that Dayton is behind us, the next big event is Field Day on the weekend of June 23rd and 24th. Take your ICOM gear into the field with your club or as a lone contester. The new ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling SDR software-defined radio with high-performance RMDR that has the ability to pick out the faintest signals even in the presence of other rigs in your field day site. This is the perfect rig to take out with a club. Its dual independent receiver design and dual digicell makes this rig even more fun when you're teamed up with one of your field day partners. The compact and state-of-the-art ICOM 7300 is the perfect field day companion and is ideal for the ham on the go. With its RF direct sampling receiver with 15 bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, and a real-time spectrum scope, allows even the beginner ham to know what's happening in the band to find even more field day contacts. The ICOM 7300 feature set and value are way ahead of other amateur rigs in its price class. For the amateur radio operator that wants it all, the best ICOM all-around rig is the ICOM IC9100 HF, VHF, and UHF transceiver capable of all modes in all bands including RTTY, D-Star, digital voice, satellite, and even moon bounce. ICOM's years of radio experience is reflected in this top-of-the-line amateur transceiver. The ICOM IC9100 has independent dual receivers, digital IF filters, satellite mode where the rig compensates for Doppler shift as the satellite flies overhead, and built-in antenna tuner. The ICOM 9100 can be connected by USB cable to your computer to operate digital modes or even remote control. George Thomas has a great video demonstrating the features of the IC9100 and the value of this amazing rig on his Amateur Logic TV channel. I'll put a link to that next to the ad in this week's show notes. So as the contest season begins, be ready with your ICOM station today. And when you make that purchase, be sure to tell them that you heard it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. Well, I read somewhere that you made a comment that when you're traveling, your wife knows that you're on the air. How does that work?
Well, on certain parts of 40 meters, only on 40 meters, I come through. There's a setup here. I mean, I don't come through anything anywhere else, but on certain parts of 40 meters, I come through the TV speakers here a little bit so she can hear it. And she says, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. I love it. I love to know that, I can hear you when you're, somewhere in the world, in Japan or in Korea or whatever."
So you're actually using this remote rig, as far away as Japan and Korea.
Absolutely. Anywhere I go, as long as I have an internet connection. Every now and then I run into a hotel that has some port blocked or something, and then the only way I can use it is to make the internet, make my phone a hotspot and connect to it via the phone. But most of the time it works anywhere I go.
Well, you have a Japanese call sign, JI1SEW. What was the reason for obtaining it, and how often do you get to use it?
Well, pretty much every time I go to Japan, I use. Yeah, I had a friend Masa who JE1LET who just said, "Hey, if you send me certain things, I'll get you a Japanese call sign." He made it very easy for me, so I just said, "Yeah, great." And so when I go to Japan, I meet with some hams. I try to if I have time, and it's always difficult on tour, but I go have lunch with them, maybe go to a station, make some contacts, for me as a person in show business to go somewhere in the world and, go to someone's house or just meet with someone that is not in the business is actually very refreshing, because you normally meet with promoters or agents or, whatever, you're in a hotel and it's, you could be anywhere really in a way. And it's only when you get out and you meet with people that you're actually in the country itself, in a way.
So do you find that hams are pretty much the same worldwide?
Oh, I mean, you can go to anywhere in the world and meet with a ham and go to their house. I mean, what an amazing community. I went to New Caledonia, and the guy said, no, I'll pick you up at the hotel. Here's the key to the club. When you're finished, lock it. I have to go because I'm working, but here's the key. Go and operate, Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And they had a little spider beam there, and 10 and 15 meters were still hopping when I went there. And I just worked a pile up until I couldn't do it anymore, until I had to go. And it was amazing, And I think it might have been 30 feet in the air, spider beam, just 100 watts. Boy, I'll tell you what, I worked everywhere with that.
Have you done any de-expeditions where you schlep the gear out to some remote place and do it on your own?
No, I've never done. I do so much traveling. I have to admit that when I'm not traveling, it's hard to get me to leave the house, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But,
well, I hear that, and it sounds to me like with a remote rig, you actually have the best of both worlds. It's almost like de-expeditioning without all of the, schlepping all of the equipment and everything other than what you're carrying in your bag.
What's amazing to me is that, with a minimal of fuss, I can hook up my remote rig in the box in my hotel in, Tokyo, or, I just came back from Turkey, and there I am on the air with all the benefits of my tower and my beam and my amplifier. It's amazing what can be done now,
It's incredible. It really is. You've mentioned that you're in show business and that you're a performer, and frankly, I can tell you that before Jim introduced you to me, I wasn't aware of you. But I have to tell you, your music is amazing. It reminds me of kind of a Stevie Wonder and George Benson mushed together, but 10 times better as a combination. So I'm going to urge listeners to look you up. But you wrote a song about the meaning of technology called "All of the Answers." Well,
yes.
Yeah, what inspired this song?
Well, actually, what inspired it was, like everybody else, I was realizing the power of technology, but also kind of the way that power can make you, what's the word I'm looking for? It sort of make you feel like you can look anything up and that information that you see is accurate. And so there's an ironic part of it that's, I have all the answers. All I have to do is, just get on
Google
the phone
it.
And yeah.
Right.
And I started to realize that, there are some things that you can look up and in 5 minutes you know something or you know about it, but there are other things that still take time. Being a musician, for example, there is no shortcut to playing an instrument. You can't read a book on guitar even or Google or go and watch a few videos and learn how to play guitar. If you want to be any good, you have to just put hours and hours and hours of time into it. And not just repetitious physical time, but mental time as well. And so that kind of struck me as something that we can get lulled into thinking that we can do anything via videos or via the internet, and it's not so.
Right, it's a 10,000 hours, right, plus of doing something to master it.
Right. I mean, some things still take time, whether it's, wine making or, music making. Some things just take their time. And that's going to be the case now, and it'll be the case 100 years from now.
What I was so pleased about when I first saw your videos is that you have this percussive style on the guitar, which I've only seen from one other guitar player, a guy named David Broza in Israel. But you even go way beyond his percussive style on the guitar. What inspired, or is there someone that inspired you to play that way?
Yeah, well, I was very influenced by flamenco, as a kid, and that's a big influence. And I think that's part of it. I also have always played drums. I've always been interested in rhythm. Of course, hand drums, bongos. You could see a video where I play the bongos and the guitar at the same time, and I sing as well. So it's kind of that desire to play drums and play guitar, and sort of I found a way to sort of combine the two by playing very rhythmically and also incorporating melody into that. But the independence takes a lot of practice and really takes, sort of breaking it down and doing one thing, then doing the other, and then putting them together very slowly. It looks very easy now, but it took quite a while. And I want to say that part of my playing I developed later. There's this conventional wisdom that you learn how to play in your 20s, and that's really when, and that's not true. A lot of what I do now happened much later in my life. I'm always working on improving. When I moved to New York, I was 36 years old, so which is unheard of. I mean,
you were like just getting started in your professional career at 36?
Well, in my career as an artist. I was a hired gun. I was a session singer. I've been doing music, I studied, but as far as being an artist, yes.
A solo artist.
A solo artist.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely. I was in Shakira's band for 2 years. And before that, I sang on everybody's record that came through Miami in the 90s. So, I was very involved in being a professional, but not as an artist.
Well, I think that was like Ricky Martin in those days.
Absolutely. You name it. Any Latin artist that went through Miami in the 90s, I sang on Enrique Iglesias' "Will You Be My Hero."
Really?
Oh yeah,
that's
I'm
cool.
in the background. I'm in the choir on that record. A bunch of stuff, the stuff that Christina Aguilera did in Spanish, I sang on that.
Well, wasn't she in a family group?
Yeah, it was
the Ramones or
Disney or something. I don't remember.
No. I think wasn't she involved? Wasn't there a group called like the Ramones, or they were a Latin American group that maybe even Ricky Martin was part of?
No, Ricky Martin was in Menudo.
Oh, yeah, Menudo, right. Okay.
Yeah, I think Christina was in Disney. I don't remember, but it had to do with Disney. I'm pretty sure.
Now, you mentioned to me that you have your own recording studio in your house.
Yes.
And I guess, the way that equipment is, I mean, I'm sitting here recording a podcast on my desk in my upstairs office with the windows open. So I'm assuming that you can do amazing things now in a home studio that used to be only done in a professional recording studio elsewhere.
Absolutely. I use a program that's called Sonar, and I use a set of scripts that was written in order to make Sonar accessible. Now, part of that has to do with what are called macros. So you script and make certain keys do things that you would normally do with a mouse. So, for example, for recording levels, there is a key that I can hit that reconfigures the screen so that the screen reader will read me the levels. So that it'll say, -6, for example. And what it does is it reads peak levels. So I can hit that button and then, sing or play the guitar and then hit the button again, and it'll tell me, okay, your peak level is this. So there's still a certain amount of dynamic reading that you can't do. Obviously, you can't see the meters, but you can. I am now going on my third album that I have engineered and produced on a professional level that will be commercially available. My last album got a Grammy nomination for best jazz vocal album. I engineered and produced the whole thing
in your basement.
I didn't mix it in my basement.
Amazing.
Some of the tracks were engineered and mixed by a friend of mine that I've been working with for a long time named Michael O'Reilly. who has helped me. You talk about mentors. He helped me a lot with engineering things. I would call him up and I would say, how do I, send you? Sometimes I would have a reverb or an effect that I wanted him to use that I had in my system that he didn't have. So he taught me how to send just the reverb. So, basically you put it pre-fader and you make a track and you just send the reverb, and then he can put it back into his, when he mixes it. So I learned all kinds of stuff from him, just talking to him on the phone. And
do you have other session players come to your house then, and you'll lay down tracks, with them?
Absolutely. I've had some of the best here. I did a recording with Diane Reeves, great singer. Liz Wright was here. I did. I've had, people come here. I've also had people send me stuff over the internet. Marcus Miller sent me something on actually a tune that I wrote with Bill Withers called Mi Amigo Cubano. So yeah, I've worked with all kinds of people. Sometimes they come here, sometimes they send me stuff, sometimes I go there, but most of the stuff I do here. I would say over 50% of it.
Well, that's pretty amazing. You're saying that somebody could actually lay down a track and send it to you, and then you'll just incorporate it into the...
Absolutely. Basically you can send them even an MP3 just so that they have the track to play to. They can do a recording, and obviously they wouldn't record an MP3, and then send it back to you either as a WAV file. Usually do it as a WAV file. I send tracks in what's called OMF, and there are reasons for that have to do with most people use Pro Tools, and the OMF file will come up with the name of the track and the ability to edit the track. So I use that format as a way to be compatible with Pro Tools, which is what most people use.
Have you ever written a ham radio song?
I have incorporated ham radio in a few. I did a song. I did a cover of I Can See for Miles, the Who tune, in which I have the CW da 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 miles and miles da 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 miles and miles in the song. On my first album, on a song called Sitting in the Middle, I actually used my call sign, my old call sign KB5ZOT, as the melody of the tune. So KB5ZOT, but as the melody.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And it was actually it went to number 2 on the Hot 100 in Tokyo.
Well, I think Japan has like 2 million hams, so it's possible that there were listeners out there that actually heard the CW, right?
If you don't tell people, though, they don't necessarily know that. But yeah, I used my call sign as the melody, and actually did it with the trumpet. That's how I did it on the record.
Well, I can tell you that when I first listened to your music, I think it was a TED Talk, I wasn't looking at this screen. I was actually working on something else. And I hear this trumpet player come in the middle of the song. And so I turned and looked over. Oh, there was no trumpet player. It was you making the trumpet sound. And I have to sound, your trumpet sounds pretty much like the real thing.
Yeah, it's like a flugelhorn. It sounds like a flugelhorn.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been doing for a long time. I was inspired by, and I'm very exacting about it. I don't want it to be a gimmick. I work on articulation. I work on pitch. It sounds like
the real thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's important to me that it be good, not just like a, police academy deal,
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. What performer inspires you?
Well,
that's a loaded question. I'm really sorry. I'll take it out.
Mostly older, like Bobby McFerrin, George Benson, Stevie Wonder, James Taylor, Paul Simon. You can tell when I grew up.
Yeah.
As far as mainstream music goes, that's the sort of thing that, and then, a bunch of jazz performers. I mean, John McLaughlin, John Scofield, Pat Metheny, Miles Davis, you go through the list there.
So you're a big listener as well as a performer.
Absolutely. Well, it's two things. If you want to read, if you want to write, you got to read. And if you want to play, do music, you have to listen to music.
Uh-huh.
So,
Do you listen to podcasts?
I have. I need to get more into that. I know that there is a huge podcast.
There's thousands of them on any subject.
Thousands of them on all subjects.
Right.
So, yeah, I need to get more into that. There's a podcast folder on everything I have, so I need to start getting into it. And I'm definitely going to check the ham radio. I always talk to my publicists about doing ham radio stuff, and they just kind of like, yeah, and they just don't get it. They don't get that there's a community out here, you know?
Well, it sounds to me like your wife Kathleen has gotten it. She let you put up that U.S. tower. I was playing with Google Earth, and you can drive right down your street and see that tower at the end of the street. And so I said, wow, what an amazing lady.
Yeah, she helped me every step of the way with. I mean,
you didn't hide it. You didn't put it in the back of the house. It's like right at the end
of
the street.
Well, we couldn't. Actually, I have to say she wanted to. But when we did the survey of the property and so forth, we really couldn't. There was certain restrictions about how far it had to be away from the edge of the property and so forth. So that we didn't have a ton of choice as to where we put. We had to get a permit for it,
Right. Did you have any problems with the neighbors? Are you in a codes, covenants, and regulations community?
No, that was when you talk about. Did ham radio have any influence? One of the things that was when we moved from Manhattan was no covenants and no homeowners association.
That's very important. Yeah.
Stipulations that because I was thinking about putting up a tower, and I've been a ham radio. I've been a ham for years and years before I got a tower, 30-some years. So this was kind of the fulfilling of a dream. I mean, I dreamed of having a tower when I was 12 years old, a TR7 or whatever was going at that time,
Well, you write on your in one of the articles I saw that that the tower is sitting where Kathleen's swimming pool would be.
Yeah, well, we're still thinking she still wants the pool, but she. And it's interesting because we had a little debate about it. Now she says, actually, I think it looks kind of pretty. So that's pretty.
Do you have a ham radio workbench?
Not really.
Uh-huh.
I have to say I am, due to, being blind and also just whatever my personality, I get help doing things, but, I'm not everything that I have is, commercial. I don't really build anything. I have the TS2000, the Ameritron solid state amp, the tuner, the TS4. Everything is, and obviously the the antennas are. I mean, I've had my share of dipoles and stuff, but the antennas are all, commercial antennas. So.
Well, you mentioned to me when we first started that you actually had some test gear that was specialized. So I guess maybe I was asking more about that.
I have two what they call talking watt meters, and they don't make them anymore, unfortunately. And they're, these watt meters that you hook antennas, and you can basically measure reflected power, SWR, and forward power. So you can, and if you push the button and hold it, it gives you a tone. So you can actually sort of dynamically measure SWR. For instance, if you're using a tuner and you want to, tune so that it's perfect, you can actually it'll actually make a tone. So you can, if you're using a tuner, for example, you can make it, perfect as far as SWR goes.
Well, it seems to me with, Arduinos and Raspberry Pis now that we certainly could make an antenna analyzer that would do the same thing. So
I would imagine so.
I'll put it out there.
Yeah, that would be, and maybe somebody's done it. I mean, these talking watt meters, I think, have been around for a while, and I think, I don't know, it might be 30-year-old technology. I'm not sure when they made these things.
Can I ask you, what kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
It's something that I've always done. It never really sort of took over my life in a certain way, but it's sort of something that I don't have a lot of family around here. There's some family in Argentina and family in New Mexico, and so it,
It's not a competition.
Not at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Not at all. I don't feel it is anyway. I think I have put it in perspective. I have the ham radio is in the same place where my studio is, and sometimes it's like, well, I really got to get off the radio and get back to work here. Yeah. There's a little bit of that goes on. And interesting enough, I say I get into the TV speakers, but I have all this really sensitive equipment, and I can run basically legal limit and nothing. I hear nothing through the equipment. It can all be on. It doesn't get through the guitar amp, nothing.
But do you think the reason for that is because you've got to work really hard to make sure that you don't have any ground loops, for hum and stuff like that. So you've got pretty much taken care of all the shielding.
I think it's because the tower is so far away from the house. Mm-hmm. It's 75 feet away from the house, and all the cabling is all underground. So I'm using hardline for every single antenna. Yep.
Wow.
It's except for coming into the house, which is coax, but even the HF antennas are all hardline, running from the base of the tower to the house. So I think that's probably why I don't have RF problems here.
Oh, that's cool. What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
Well, I think and I haven't experienced it, but I think this incorporating of SDR into radios with knobs, that if there's something that I would get, and I'm not like a gear hog. I'm not interested in getting every new piece of gear that comes out. Like, I'm really happy to have what I have, honestly. But if I were to get something, I think I would really explore that, because I think that's the idea of having, really, really sharp filters and really being able to. I'm an HF guy. That's the bottom line. That excites me more than all this other stuff. And to be able to have, like, I'd love to hear what the DSP is like on some of these newer radios. I can imagine that. I mean, even on my 2000, what we can do with DSP compared to what we had is just unbelievable. A CW signal that normally would be completely inaudible. You put the DSP and you narrow down the filter, and it's like that's the only thing you hear. It's amazing. And I'm sure what I have is primitive compared to what's available now,
Yeah, what's interesting is, companies like Flex Radio, that started with just the computer interface now have, their Maestro, which is they've gone back to knobs and buttons and switches to control the radio because I guess, we hams, we like our knobs.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the idea of controlling a radio with a mouse just it does not interest me. I don't have any, people that do that. I'm sure it's amazing, but I need some knobs. That's why I use Remote Rig as opposed to, the Kenwood software and just use my PC, because I have enough going on with using the computer for music and trying to figure out how to work around things. And when I get on the radio, I don't want to be working around. I want to, turn knobs.
Right.
And I want the radio to talk to me. That's why I use Kenwood. Kenwood's voice guidance is always been really, really good. And unless I found something comparable, I think I would always get Kenwood stuff because of that.
I think that they are outstanding in that area of accessibility. I actually probably should look into what the other manufacturers do, but I've heard this before from other blind hams that I've interviewed, is that the Kenwood stuff is just right out there.
I mean, the voice guidance on both the 480 and the 2000 is outstanding. Obviously frequency, and if it doesn't talk to you, at least it beeps at you,
So you know where the band edges are. Oh
yeah. Well, I mean, you can just hit and the voice is configurable. So there's a button, I think they call it the PF button, that you can make anything you want. So you can make that the S meter, for instance. So you can actually give somebody an accurate S meter reading. And you can hit the enter button a couple of times anywhere and it'll tell you the frequency. So, you don't have to guess about band edges. You can actually hear it. And we used to have to guess,
Right, basically. I hear that. Now, is your brother, is he, you say he's still an active ham? What's his call sign?
Yes, he is. His call sign is actually mine, which is a weird story. N5ACR is now his call sign.
Really?
Yeah. It was a mix-up with the FCC. I wrote him. I wanted to get my call back, and they gave it to him instead. I'm not sure what happened there. But,
well, they always, which one are you? I think we said this at the beginning, that Raul and Marco are identical twins. I'm also an identical twin. And people would always come up to us and they'd say, well, which one are you? And my response was, I'm the other one. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're in very different situations now. So, our circles are very different. So,
do you ever catch him on the air?
Sometimes. I mean, yeah.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Well, the first thing I would say is, don't think that this is the way. The conditions right now are the worst I've ever seen. So it's. I feel a little bit sorry for hams getting into it right now because of the sunspot cycle being so bad. When 10 meters is open, it's just such a great thing. You could just put a little whip out with almost no power and talk to the world with it. But I guess I actually have a friend that just got into ham radio, and and he was talking about, oh man, I want to get this and that and everything. It's like, just start small. Don't worry. You don't have to get it all at one time. I mean, what you 7,300 now for whatever it is, $1,200. I mean, to get that much radio for that little money is incredible.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And that and a dipole will get you plenty started for sure.
Is that the way he went?
Excuse me?
Is that the way he went in the end? Did he take your advice?
Yeah. He bought a 7,300. He's a good friend of mine. He's actually a very well-known conductor in my business, and he's got some ridiculous amount of Grammys, and he just became a ham. We were talking on a break from working on this record that's coming out that I did with the orchestra. And he said, I've always been into scanners, since I was a kid. And I'm like, man, you should really become a ham. And I hipped him to some study sites that on the web. The one I used was AE9PW, and before I know it, he calls me and says, "Oh, yeah, I just got my tech. I'm studying for my general." So pretty awesome.
That is awesome.
He is now a ham, and I think he got a 7300. I think he put some kind of he lives in Santa Monica, so it's hard to put antennas up there. There's small lots and whatever, probably super homo. I'm not sure what he's got going, but he put up something in his yard. So.
Well, you know what? You don't have to put up very much now. I think you can put a magnetic loop antenna on the patio, make it look like a patio
I've
table.
heard about those. When I was living in New York, I really thought about those, but I guess they're very high Q.
Yeah, they're very high Q. Yeah, you have to, if you move just slightly, you have to retune it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to put 1,000 watts in it and be nearby, right?
Right. Well, even like the Isotron I had, if I had run power, I think I would have gotten into everything within a mile radius because it radiated through everywhere. I mean, it was, coming through coax and
you could hear it in the phones.
Yeah.
Right. Raul, you've been such a pleasure. I'm so happy that Jim introduced us. It was great to hear your ham radio story. If the listeners wanted to find out more about Raul Midon, AE3RM, where would they go?
Well, they could go to my website. There's hundreds of videos probably on YouTube, maybe more. There's plenty. All my records are available on Amazon or wherever, spot everywhere. So
you're not hard. You're not a hard guy to find.
No, not at all. And I tour a lot. I'm always touring. So, it's pretty active, and I'm pretty active on ham radio, especially now with the remote, even if I don't have any time, almost any time, usually after a show, instead of going to the bar, I go back up to my room and, maybe talk on the ham radio for an hour or so and then go to bed,
That sounds great.
So.
It was such a pleasure. And with that, I'm going to wish you 73, Raul, and thanks so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Raul. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put an AE3RM in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages or by mentioning that you heard it here on QSO Today. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available in iHeartRadio and the iTunes Store and a host of other podcast services and applications. Stitcher is still my favorite. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who's solely responsible for its content.